Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Georgia, and on behalf of Carahsoft Technology, I would like to welcome you to our Marion Square and Carahsoft webinar, Navigating the Federal AI Landscape, Roadmaps, Strategies, and Opportunities for AI Vendors. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's presentation. Harvey Morrison is the co-founder and CEO of Marion Square, an advisory firm dedicated to helping technology companies successfully navigate and do business with the U.S. government. With over 20 years of experience, Harvey has led sales and business development efforts across a wide range of technologies. His deep expertise in federal procurement, combined with a strong network across government agencies and technology providers, enables him to help companies accelerate growth, secure contracts, and align with key government initiatives. We also have Caitlin Lewis, who is our market research director at Carahsoft, and she helps technology companies understand how government is actually buying and adopting technology, with a strong focus on what's driving real adoption in the market today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers for today's presentation. Harvey and Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks very much, Georgia. Appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today's session is focused on a topic that we at Marion Square spend a great deal of time analyzing and tracking for many of our clients. And that's how artificial intelligence is actually being adopted across the U.S. federal government. As we all know, there's a tremendous amount of activity today around AI. There are conferences, policy discussions, and innovation initiatives, all focusing on the transformative potential of AI for government, really at every level. But for companies that are trying to build a real business in the federal market, the key questions tend to be much more practical. Questions like, what agencies are actually investing in AI? What operational problems are agencies really trying to solve? And where is actual spending occurring? And how do you best align your technology with the needs of those agencies that are spending? And these are just a few of the topics we want to explore during our session today. We're also going to walk through how adoption is evolving across federal agencies, the types of use cases that are emerging, the programs and missions where spending is actually occurring, and how AI companies should be thinking about targeting the federal market more strategically. The goal of the session is simply not to talk about AI as a technology trend, because we all know that it is, but really to provide a clearer picture of where the real opportunities exist inside government missions. As Georgia said, I'm really excited to be joined today by Caitlin Lewis from Carahsoft. And Caitlin, as we're diving in here, I'm just curious, is there anything specific that you're tracking or any major trends that you're tracking in AI today as we go to kick this off?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Harvey. Really excited to be here with you today and having this conversation. There's a ton that we're tracking, right? But I think one of the biggest things we're seeing across government right now is just the pressure agencies are under, operating under, right? There's those time constraints, there's workforce shortages, there's, the growing cybersecurity demands. And it's all happening at the same time. And none of these are new trends, right? But they're definitely all intensifying right now. And I think that's really shaping how agencies are thinking about AI. And you just said it, Harvey. It's less about the technology itself, and it's really, hey, how does AI help address those pressure points? And because of that, that's when AI really starts showing up in the practical way. Like you said, it's not really in the quite doing my dishes part just yet, which is what I'm really waiting for. But it's definitely a lot less, talk and a lot more actual use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm at the RSA conference right now in San Francisco, and Gartner released some information yesterday, and they were talking about something around 86% of federal government agencies they polled are investing and have programs in AI right now. So I think your note there of the pressures intensifying is really being driven in the market or being seen in the market today. So if you would, Abby, next slide. And I'm going to let you go to the next one because Georgia did a great job introducing Marion Square. So let's kind of start our session by just taking a quick look at some of the specific topics we'll be talking about today. And I'll reemphasize, there's the chat and the question. If you have those as we go through this, please enter those in there. And if we see them during the call, we'll try to pick up on some of them as well and answer them in real time. But the first thing we want to take a look at is how AI adoption is really evolving across federal agencies. Over the past several years, agencies have been exploring how artificial intelligence can support mission operations. And our research today that we'll walk through, I think, clearly shows that adoption across agencies continues to expand. Second, we want to talk about why understanding who is spending actually matters. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of discussion about AI across all levels of government. But the real insight for technology companies is understanding which agencies are investing in AI and what problems they're trying to solve with it. Third, we want to discuss the AI maturity model across federal agencies. So not every agency is at the same stage of their AI journey. Some agencies are still building the underlying infrastructure required for AI, while others are already deploying AI solutions operationally. Fourth, we'll talk a little bit about the dominant AI use cases in government. And these are use cases that you'll see are merging across all agencies. Then we'll connect those use cases to specific programs and budgets that are driving demand for AI capabilities. So we're going to give you some insights there that I think will help you in a targeting perspective. You start to look at where we should target agencies or which agencies we should target with our technology. And then finally, we're going to discuss how companies should be thinking about, again, targeting federal agencies based on all this alignment. So I think we've got a good agenda today. Again, ask questions as we go along, and if we see them and can get to them, we sure will. So Abby, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Before we kind of get into the specifics of the federal AI market, I think it's worth grounding on what's actually happening right now. AI is not a new notion in government. Agencies have been using machine learning, analytics, and automation for years across areas like fraud detection, mission analytics, and operational support. What is new, and Caitlin, this goes to exactly what you hit on earlier, is the heightened level of attention, urgency, and structure around this market. We've seen AI elevated from individual programs and use cases, I think, to broader government-wide priorities with increased visibility from leadership, new policy guidance around how it should be deployed and how it should be procured. We're going to talk about that. And a growing expectation that agencies really operationalize these capabilities. So move it from test into, hey, we're actually going to operationalize these technologies and use them to improve mission outcomes. So for companies, trying to build a real federal business, this distinction matters because the challenge isn't determining whether government is interested in AI or even whether AI is already in use. In my opinion, the challenge is understanding where the activity is translating into things like expanded programs, new funding, and defined procurement pathways. And this is where we're seeing the major shift. On one side, you have top-down direction, right, with the recent White House guidance starting to shape how agencies evaluate, govern, and then ultimately procure AI. So that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And at the same time, you're seeing bottom-up execution, right? Programs across DHS, Treasury, DoD, and others are expanding AI into more operational environments. And that's a key thing to think about. And we're going to talk about that when you look at where you should target and where you should be going. That combination, I think, is what turns AI from something that exists inside various pockets of government into something that creates a real scalable, repeatable market opportunity for organizations. So the real questions I think we should be focusing on here are, where is AI expanding, not just existing in government, because it's really existing everywhere? What mission problems are driving that expansion? You need to know that to build your go-to-market around that. And where are those efforts backed by programs and real specifically budgets? So that's something we need to think about. And again, we're going to cover some of that at a high level. So Caitlin, let me kind of bring you in here from your perspective at Carahsoft. I know you're seeing sort of that same shift as you talked about from existing AI use cases to broader use cases, more structured adoption, and actually folks really starting to push to get this going. What do you think's driving all this activity?
I think there's a lot that's, driving the shift in this activity, and you hit on a lot of it, right? Like I'm gonna first kind of break it down a little bit of like, and you said this, AI really used to live in a lot of different pockets and in
Mhm.
those individual programs, testing, proving that value. And it's starting to get more formalized. Like you're seeing it in those
Yep.
leadership priorities you just talked about, hey, the top down, 100%. It's being, agencies are building out like the infrastructure, the governance around it, and then that's
Yep.
flowing down into the procurement activity, right? So it always starts with policy, and then it gets driven down into that procurement level over a couple of months. So you're going to see it at the presidential level, OMB, the agency level, and then, hey, they have to start putting it into their budgets over time.
Yep.
Um, and we're still also seeing like some pilots as
Yeah.
well that are going on. But like you said, it's more about kind of land and expand. They don't want it just for
Yeah.
one single use case. They want it for the entirety of government. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a big shift from the pilot to actually being integrated into traditional procurement, which is pretty interesting to follow.
Yeah, we always counsel our clients at Marion Square to think about, two things. One, how can you pilot your solution very quickly and show value? Because a lot of times that's how organizations want to test it and see it. And then secondly, how can you work with somebody like a Carosoft to be able to scale this thing really quickly? Right. So once we've proven it, now we want to be able to scale it as quickly as possible across the enterprise. So we're seeing quite a bit of that as well. So that's really good insight there, Caitlin. Next slide, if you would, please, Abby. So just some structural things on how we're doing some of this analysis in the market. I mean, one of the reasons I think we're able to really analyze the federal market with, I think, a high degree of specificity is because if you're not following it, agencies are actually required to publish information on how they're using AI. These requirements stem from, as we talked about, the top-down approach, efforts like the Executive Order 13960, and then the Advancing American AI Act, which came out. And both of these direct agencies to document and report on their AI use cases and deployments. So as a result, agencies now maintain AI inventories that provide visibility into where AI is being applied, what missions problems it supports, and how adoption is evolving across government. And this really is an important because it gives us a baseline, really a data-driven view into how AI is actually being used inside federal agencies today. So keep in mind, though, these inventories, like everything, right? They're not perfect. A lot of them are incomplete and inconsistently updated, and they don't always reflect the full scope of what's happening across government, but they do provide a valuable window into how agencies are both experimenting with and beginning to operationalize AI capabilities. And this really allows us, I think, to move beyond broad discussions about AI and really start to identify real use cases, real mission alignment, and where those opportunities may exist. And again, while this is just one part of how we at Marion Square and other folks at Carosoft analyze this market, it does, I think, again, I want to emphasize, really form an important foundation for really understanding where AI activity is actually taking place in government. So if you would, please go to the next slide. So when we look at the AI inventories published by federal agencies, one thing is, I think, really becoming clear. The number of reported AI use cases across government has been increasing significantly over the past several years. A few years ago, when this first came out and agencies had to start reporting them, they only reported a few hundred, AI use cases. More recently, that number has grown to over 1,000 use cases across federal agencies. And then today, so the last sort of known standard report in FY25 reported several thousand use cases across different mission agencies. This growth reflects the fact that agencies are increasingly exploring how artificial intelligence can support their mission, whether that's improving operational decision making, analyzing large data sets, or automating certain administrative processes. What is important to understand, however, is that these use cases are not evenly distributed across government. So some agencies are experimenting with AIs in limited ways, while others are deploying it in much more aggressive fashions across operational programs. And we're going to talk and explore about this. And I think that brings us to really an important point about the federal AI landscape that I want to make sure I emphasize is that while many agencies are exploring AI, they're not all at the same stage in their AI journey. Caitlin, from your perspective, working with technology vendors and federal agencies at Carahsoft, I mean, are you seeing a similar increase in interest around AI? I mean, they're publishing it. Are you seeing the pull through? I guess would be my comment at the Carahsoft level. And really, I know we're going to talk about it, but are there any specific sorts of areas or capabilities that organizations or agencies are starting to talk about that they're really interested in?
Yeah, 1,000%. We're absolutely seeing that increase, and I mean, even on the slide, right? You can see the growth over the years. I'm expecting by 2026 there's probably going to be 10,000 use cases
Yeah.
when that gets released. And I think, a way to kind of think about this is thinking about the different agencies, right? They're all a little bit different, and it's by design, right? They have different missions. They were stood up on different foundations. So the demand's really going to vary depending on what they're trying to solve, what are their pain points, problems, what is their mission set out to do.
Yeah.
But there are some common trends. I think the first one is there's a hype around Gen AI, but I also want to say it's not the only thing that they're interested in. It's still
Yep.
very important. But there's things like the predictive analytics, machine learning, automation, and it's really to be tied into those practical ways, right? Reducing the manual work, making sense of larger, data sets, supporting cybersecurity for threat detection, things like that. But I think across all of that, there's really a big focus on secure, explainable AI,
Yep.
because agencies want to understand how does it actually operate, how is it making those decisions so that they understand. There's a phrase called human in the loop. They need a human in the loop to
Yep.
understand this, right? So I think overall, absolutely, demand has been growing. It continues to grow. And again, it's just being driven by all those practical pressure points, problem challenges. Insert your favorite adjective right there, in the government.
Yeah, no, and I think we're going to cover this a little bit, but I think been a lot of guidance coming out recently around, to your point, explainable AI, the supply chain around AI, as it starts to expand and get integrated into these operational programs. That's going to play a more important
Yeah.
role, and organizations are going to have to be able to explain that very quickly and succinctly in order to keep, to make themselves competitive in this market, I guess.
Yep.
Abby, if you go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. And this is, I think, the important slide that everybody wants to understand, right? In addition to the growing number of AI use cases, we're also seeing a steady increase in federal spending on artificial intelligence. So, over the past several years, agencies have been investing more heavily in data infrastructure, analytics platforms, and AI enabled applications. Estimates suggest that federal AI related spending has grown from roughly a couple $1 billion annually just a few years ago to several $1 billion today. And that spending, I think, is driven by a few key trends, right? First, agencies continue to invest in data modernization, which I think is foundational, as we all know, to deploying AI systems. Second, many organizations are expanding their use of advanced analytics and machine learning to really support, again, operational missions. Caitlin, you mentioned that. And then third, we're now seeing growing experimentation, as you mentioned, right? Generative AI, particularly in areas like document analysis, knowledge management, and decision support. So when we combine the growth in these use cases with the increase in spending, I think it becomes clear that AI is moving beyond experimentation in the federal government and really becoming a more meaningful part of how agencies generally just operate. However, even with this growth, I think it's really important to understand that agencies, again, are not all at the same stage of AI adoption. As we mentioned, some organizations are building the infrastructure needed to support AI systems, while others are much more advanced and are already deploying AI capabilities across operational programs. So, Caitlin, similar to last slide, are you seeing agencies spend more? And from a contracting perspective, what kind of insights can you provide there?
Yes, absolutely. There's definitely a huge uptick on the contract procurement side. And it's a lot more consistent, like a consistent uptick that we're seeing. I feel like AI is the government's favorite topic right now. It's like they light up when they hear this. So there's definitely a huge interest in this technology. We're seeing it more in requirements and the awards that are getting released. It's not just sitting in those early stage efforts anymore. And a lot of the spend is being tied to things that agencies are already investing in, right?
Yep.
And that's what I want everyone to kind of keep in mind is like AI isn't being bought on its own.
Yes.
It's getting built into those larger efforts, so around
Yep.
cybersecurity, um, and those data platforms, everything that we've been talking about. And that's why we keep bringing it up, right? Because they want AI to be integrated into their priorities that they already have. So I want vendors to keep in mind, it's less about chasing something that's like labeled AI, and
Yep.
it's more about understanding where it fits into those bigger initiatives and where the funding already exists. But there's definitely a huge, huge, huge interest in AI, and again, it's becoming a part of the traditional, kind of contracting pathways of how they're buying it.
Yeah, so again, I'm out here at RSA, and everything is AI related. If you can imagine, at RSA, I think if you don't have AI, they won't let you get a booth here. That's one thing, and then I think the second thing, and we're going to cover it in a little more detail, Caitlin, but you hit on it, and I think it's critical for organizations to be thinking about it. Is to your point, don't go look for a line item that says AI. You need to understand where your technology fits in some of these large programs and the value that it has and approach those programs. They're not going to have a line item in a budget that says they might not, it's not 100%, but these big, large programs where they're operationalizing AI at scale, it's not going to have an AI line item. You have to understand where you fit in that program and the value you add for that program. And that's the approach that you need to take. So that's great. Okay, next slide, please. So again, we want to dive into this a little bit, right? While there is widespread interest in artificial intelligence across government, not every organization is equally prepared to deploy AI systems. So in many cases, agencies need to build the underlying infrastructure that allows AI capabilities to function effectively. So basically, what we're saying is you can't treat them all as the same thing. Every agency is at a different level in its maturity model. So, for example, agencies that are still working through data modernization, cloud adoption, and data governance may not be ready to deploy advanced AI systems, right? So you got to understand that before you go in. Those organizations, I think, are really primarily focused on building the data and compute environments that systems require. So if you're in that space, those are the organizations you need to be targeting. If you're selling advanced AI going into operation, maybe a little too early. Other agencies, are further along and have begun deploying operational capabilities such as analytic tools, machine learning models, and document analysis systems that support mission workflows. And I think there's a smaller number of organizations that are beginning to, I think, really scale AI across multiple mission areas. These are agencies that are integrating AI into operational decision making, predictive analytics, and automated workflows across programs. And again, Caitlin and I are trying to, I think, really impress this upon organization is understanding where an agency sits along this maturity model is extremely important for technology companies. If an agency is still focused on infrastructure and data modernization, they may not be ready for an advanced AI application. But agencies that maybe already have a strong data environment in place and are often actively looking for AI capabilities that can support their operational missions. So keep that in mind as you're starting your go-to-market effort. Again, not all agencies are at the same spot. So, Caitlin, how are you seeing agencies really kind of approach this journey? Are most agencies still focused on building infrastructure, or are you seeing more agencies maybe ready to deploy AI, or is it really kind of across the board?
I think it's really a mix. I think it's across the board, and I think that's kind of what makes this market a little bit more nuanced right now.
Yep.
And Harvey, you kind of already said it, but like there's some organizations that are getting their environment in place, that are getting the right structure, but at the same time, there's agencies that are already putting AI into production, right, using it to support their operational analysis, internal workflows. Um, and then some of the smaller groups are starting to scale it a little bit more broadly. So it's very widespread.
Yeah.
And I know you just said, and I'm going to harp on this a little bit of, you don't treat every agency the same,
Yep.
120%. I'm going to take it a step further. I wouldn't treat the entire agency as the same.
Yeah.
I would break
That's a
it
good point.
down and think about it, right, by the specific programs, the teams, and what they're ready for. And I think that's where the advantage comes from, right? Is meeting them where they are, and helping to get something stood up and plugged in that's ready to expand right now. So again, it's all about conversations with our customers right now.
Yeah. No, I would. Yeah, I emphasize exactly what you're saying. I think that's really critical for organizations to think about, so you don't run around having a bunch of really good meetings and no opportunities
Yep.
at the end of it. So with that context, I think what I want to do now is let's kind of shift and take a look at how AI is actually being used inside government missions. So what we've done is we've gone out and we've analyzed the AI inventories published by federal agencies, and we look at that. I think we really begin to see some really clear patterns. So, oh, great, Abby, at the next slide. So the first stage that we often see across federal agencies is what we call the infrastructure foundations. In this case, agencies are focused on building the underlying capabilities required to support artificial intelligence. So this includes efforts such as modernizing their data environments, migrating systems to the cloud, improving data governance, and really creating the compute infrastructure needed to drive, AI or operationalize AI. Many agencies across government are really still working through these foundational efforts. So, for technology companies, this stage is important to recognize because these organizations are often not yet ready to deploy sophisticated AI applications, but they are laying the groundwork that'll eventually support them. So, know who they are and keep track of them because they're heading in your direction, and that's a good signal to watch. Other agencies I think have moved beyond infrastructure and are beginning to integrate AI directly into mission workflows. So, Abby, if you'll go to the next slide, please. And that's this poll question jumped out at me. All right. And this sort of second stage is what we describe as operational AI deployment. So in this phase, agencies are beginning to apply artificial intelligence to really support specific mission functions. This might include analyzing documents, assisting investigators with large data sets, improving operational planning, or helping analysts identify patterns in complex data. Many civilian agencies today are operating, I think, in this phase where AI is being used to improve efficiencies, decision making, improve decision making efficiencies, and those sorts of things. For AI companies, this stage often represents, I think, the most immediate opportunity because agencies are actively looking for technologies that can help solve operational problems. And then I think, the next one is there's a smaller number of agencies that have really begun to scale AI across programs. Abby, if you go to the next slide. And this is really what we call sort of the third stage, AI at scale, right? In this phase, agencies are integrating artificial intelligence across multiple programs and mission areas. These agencies typically have strong data infrastructure and have already gained experience deploying AI tools in the operational environments. So as a result, they're really able to expand AI capabilities into areas such as predictive analytics, automated decision support, and large-scale data analysis. Some examples of agencies that I think are moving in this direction include parts of the Department of Defense, Treasury, and then some other large civilian agencies that manage extensive data environments. These organizations, I think, often represent some of the most advanced AI deployments in the federal government. Caitlin, any additional insights you'd like to offer about sort of this, this spectrum, if you will, of the different phases that federal agencies are in?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of how do you tell what maturity level is a government in? And I think, it's kind of how they are talking about AI. So if you're hearing that they're talking broad, explanatory, right, they're a little bit earlier, but if they're asking those specific questions of how does it apply to their day to day, to their job, their workflows, they're much farther along. And if you're not directly talking to a customer, you guys can still see the signals like in how RFP requirements are being written, how
Um,
detailed out it is, what are they asking for in that market research. And really, the more defined the problem is, the more the real opportunity I think is there. And that's where, we see agencies really wanting to work with technology providers is to, refine these use cases, prove it out, expand it from there. So I think it's, those are some key indicators to tell of where they're kind of at in the process. Because I know sometimes that can be a little hard to see too.
yeah, you've got to pick up those little signals or flags
Yeah.
as to where an agency is. And again, to your point, and we're doing a lot of this at Marion Square right now, is really digging in on the programs, right? So it's not, each agency, to your point, is at a different level. But then I also think, as you mentioned earlier, it goes down to the program level too,
Yeah.
as to which programs are there as well. So yeah, spend some time up front doing your research, because it's going to save you a lot of time on the back end when you go in for your go to market, would be my
Hmm.
suggestion. That's what we suggest to all of our clients. So what I'd like to do now, kind of the next question I think we want to answer is what types of problems are agencies actually using AI to solve? So let's go to the next slide, Abby, if you would, please. And what we really want to do is, this is a breakout of all those use cases that we mentioned earlier. And when we begin to analyze the AI use case inventories published by federal agencies, so some clear patterns begin to emerge. While agencies report thousands of use cases, systems, pilot programs, the majority of these use cases tend to fall into a small number of operational categories. The largest category involves operational decision support, where AI is used to help analysts and operators make sense of complex data. The second major category involves document and knowledge intelligence, where AI systems help agencies process and analyze large volumes of text and documents. And the third major category involves fraud detection and risk analysis, where AI is used to identify anomalies and potential misuse of government programs. Understanding these categories, I think, is important because they represent the areas where AI adoption has been most consistent across federal agencies. Now keep in mind, we're not saying these are the only AI use cases, but we analyzed the 3,000 that government put out there, and these are kind of the big three buckets that they fell in. There are lots of other use cases going on, but if you do a broad brush of the market, these are kind of those big three areas. Now, Caitlin, from your perspective, Carosoft's perspective, are there particular use cases where you're seeing especially strong demand from agencies today?
Yeah. Yeah. I think where we're seeing the most pull right now is around that internal facing use cases.
Yeah.
Really, what it boils down to, the government just wants to understand their own data, right? And then how do they apply that data into their everyday kind of workflow? So you're going to
Right.
see in things like knowledge management, right? Internal searching, workflow support. That's really where there's getting a lot of attention.
Mhm.
But there's also a growing focus on augmentation, right? Going back to those workforce shortages, so they want to augment, not necessarily, also replacing the tools that they have or things that are already in place.
Yeah.
So it's getting those tools that really sit alongside of the existing systems, and helping the teams move faster without having to overhaul everything. If we all
Yeah.
think about, having to sit down and listening to a training and learning a new skill, it can be pretty difficult, right? So
Yeah.
AI is meant to come in and help with that. So it can also
Yeah.
get, there's again these skill gaps in the government right now. So it's supposed to help close that kind of skill gap right now. And there's also interest in agencies around standardization and reuse. So like what we
Yeah.
were saying before, right? It's not for that single use case, but
Right.
again, it all just comes down to understanding their data and how do they use it and how do they use it quickly.
Yeah. That's great. So what we'll do now is let's just, the next couple slides, let's dive into each one of those use cases that we talked about in a little more detail, just to give you a little more clarity around them. So operational decision support, as we mentioned, is one of the most common use cases of artificial intelligence, at least from across the federal government. Many government missions involve analyzing, as you know, large volumes of operational data in order to make decisions about resources, how resources should be allocated or where attention should be focused. Large operational organizations, think about, Health and Human Services, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Homeland Security, I think are all good examples of organizations and agencies that would utilize this type of AI. These agencies manage, if you think about it, enormous operational workloads, healthcare claims, benefit processing, operational planning, and security missions. AI systems are increasingly being used to help analysts and operators do things like prioritize cases, identify patterns in large data sets, and improve operational decision making. So in these environments, AI is not, I think, replacing human decision makers. So we always talk about the human in the loop. It's helping them make better and faster decisions based on complex data. So another major category of AI development or deployment across government involves analyzing large volumes of documents and unstructured information. And this is kind of the second major category of AI use cases, which we're kind of defined as document and knowledge intelligence. So many government missions depend on analyzing large volumes of reports, cases, and investigative materials. Again, agencies like Department of Justice, HHS, and the Veterans Affairs manage enormous document repositories. Artificial intelligence, think about it helping analysts summarize documents, extract key information, and search large knowledge repositories more efficiently. Again, this is one of the areas where generative AI tools are starting to have, I think, an impact, particularly in environments where analysts need to review large volumes of unstructured information. So then, the third category is really centered around fraud and risk. And fraud and risk detection, I think, is another area where AI has proven extremely valuable for government agencies. Many federal programs involve large financial transactions or benefits payments, which we all know create an opportunity for fraud or misuse. So, think of Department of Treasury as an area. Again, HHS more specifically around CMS, USDA around SNAP programs and other things like that, are all actively looking at and are deploying tools to analyze transaction data and identify unusual patterns. These systems, I think, if you look at AI, can help agencies detect anomalies that may indicate fraud, improper payment, or other forms of program abuse. So because these agencies manage large financial programs, even small improvements in detection can really result in significant savings. And, just for those of you that are kind of watching this space, just last week, the administration announced a fraud task force, right? And I think with that fraud task force, we're going to see an increasing focus on that across all government. So I think this fraud and risk detection use case is probably going to move up the ladder some. And so if you're in that area and can help organizations identify that, that's something that I think is going to be really critical for you. Caitlin, any comments or thoughts on those areas?
No, I think you're definitely spot on. I think just the one thing to just really drive home is that AI is really going to be anywhere, right? That you see that volume, complexity, or really just a need to like move faster. That's really where it's being adopted. So
Yep.
again, it's agencies that are handling a lot of kind of data, and then it's being applied to the different practicalities. And I think if you really look at the agencies you just broke down, a lot
Yep.
of these topics they align with the mission and like the challenges and the pressure points that we're seeing, right, in the overall trends.
Yep. Exactly. So if you go to the next slide, really what we want to just highlight here are the agencies that are really driving AI demand. So if you look at and break down the AI use cases, these were the major agencies that had a lot of those use cases. If you think about them, they're large operational organizations, and these agencies manage extremely large operational workloads. So think healthcare systems, benefit programs, border security operations, public health missions, right? All these generate massive amounts of data. And artificial intelligence can help these organizations analyze that data, identify patterns, and really support operational decision making, right? So again, we're not saying this is every AI use case and these are the only organizations that have it, but these are some of the big ones that are starting to drive it. Caitlin, are you seeing any other agencies that maybe stand out for you where AI adoption is really, really going, or other sort of agencies folks may want to consider?
Yeah, yeah. I think Social Security Administration, that's
Yeah.
definitely a big one with case management processing. Um, GSA, definitely another one with just a lot of the data that they sit on for the entire federal government.
Good point.
I've seen some stuff with the U.S. Postal Service, just trying to improve, some of the logistics, the routing, just to make them a little bit more,
Yep.
efficient at scale. Um,
Exactly.
it's in a lot of agencies. Again, it's based off of their mission, right? It's how they're trying to
Exactly.
operationalize. So yeah.
Yep. Agree wholeheartedly. So what we can do next, if you'll go to the next slide, is let's just take a look at, we've talked about how agencies are wanting to operationalize this and really scale it across their organization. But let's just take a look at some of those. Again, it's not being deployed standalone, but it's being integrated across, specific operational programs that support missions. And so here's just some examples of those. And the reason I bring this up and want to mention this is, again, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, you don't go into HHS and CMS and expect to see a bunch of RFPs just looking for AI, right? What you really need to think about is okay, there's a lot of healthcare program integrity shops across HHS, CMS, Health and Human Services, all the other ones. You need to understand what those programs are, your value for those programs, and then go have a discussion with those organizations about how you're going to be able to improve the mission outcome of what those large programs are trying to solve. So that's really the point of what I want to get across in this slide. Is, again, don't think of it as they're buying a widget off the shelf and they're just buying AI to do this. They want to integrate it into these large programs to solve specific problems. And these programs are up, running, going, and already funded. That's the good thing about it. I don't know, Caitlin, is there anything you wanted to maybe add here?
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's everything is boiling down to understanding the program, understanding the needs, and then, hey, how does AI apply to it? So
Yep.
guys, start building out your AI story and kind of picking on one or two use cases and hone into that. And Harvey and all of Marion Square does such a great job of helping you guys do that. So definitely leverage them to bring that story to life and figure out where to find your fit in the market.
No, thanks for that. So next slide, if you would please. All I wanted to do with this slide for you all is really give you a sense of, again, some of the budget that's being spent today. Again, this is not all on AI, but these are the budgets being spent for some of these large operationalized programs inside of these agencies. And this is the opportunity for you to go in. And again, if you understand the program, understand the mission that program is trying to solve, and how AI can improve those mission outcomes, that's the discussion you're wanting to have with these organizations. The money is there. Government is being pushed, as Caitlin said earlier, to integrate AI to generate better outcomes. So what your objective is to find those programs that are funded, where you fit, and then be able to clearly explain to them how you're going to better that mission outcome. That's fundamentally, I mean, that sounds simple. It's difficult, but that's fundamentally what you're needing to be able to do with that. And I know, Caitlin, you work really closely with a lot of technology vendors. How should companies begin to think about this market to really kind of engage? Like, they look at it and go, it's a big opportunity, it's massive.
Yep.
Where do we start?
Yeah. I think you start at the contracting level, honestly. I think it's understanding how does your customer agency buy. There's a lot of buzz right now around these flexible procurement pathways, but the government's still really learning how to scale that out. So if you guys have heard the words like OTAs, programs like Tradewin,
CSO,
exactly,
BAA, all
yeah,
those sorts of things. Yep,
SIBRs,
yep.
open topics, all that stuff. But really the government's still using those traditional procurement pathways because it's faster. It's the quickest way
Yeah.
for them to get what they need. And it's just understanding those contracts that are available and then partnering with the right people, like
Yep.
Caresoft, right? Hey, we have GSA schedules, we have a ton of BPAs and things like that are in place. So it's really just understanding where your customer is buying because customers will ask you, hey, now where
Yeah.
can I buy you? And they want it to be off of a approved, procurement vehicle that they can
Yep.
use.
And it's interesting, some agencies like VA have come out with like the Avail contract, which is
Yeah,
specific for AI.
yeah,
So if you want to be involved in AI, you've got to access that through Avail, whether it's services or software. So that's interesting. So Abby, what I'm going to do because we're getting close to the end here. If you'll skip the next slide and go to I want to hit the slide on procurement. It's a good follow up to what Caitlin was mentioning. So as agencies continue to expand their use of artificial intelligence, I think we're beginning to see clearer expectations around how these technologies are going to be procured and then deployed, right? So government organizations are increasingly focused on ensuring that AI systems meet certain requirements. And Caitlin, you mentioned this earlier, related to transparency, reliability, and security. So as they start to integrate these into massive programs, transparency, reliability, and security are going to be really critical, right? So, for example, agencies are placing greater emphasis on explainability, particularly when AI systems are used to support, again, operational decision making. Like, hey, how do we come up with this information? There's also a growing attention to issues such as government ownership and control of data to ensure that agencies remain or maintain appropriate access to the data used by AI systems. And I think another important factor that we're starting to see is interoperability. Since many federal agencies involve, complex legacy systems that new technologies need to integrate into, interoperability is a key piece to that. And then we're also seeing increasing attention to supply chain trust and responsible AI as well. So, in fact, one of the things, Caitlin, you and I spent some time talking on a couple of weeks ago is GSA just recently released draft guidance. So it's not formalized yet, but it's draft. It'll be coming, but it outlines procurement considerations for AI systems that agencies need to follow. And it highlights all those areas: transparency, data governance, responsible deployment of AI capabilities. So for organizations wanting to attack this market, these are things you have to understand and be able to clearly explain upfront to federal agencies to make sure they're really comfortable with what you're doing. Caitlin, you talked about contracting, the third poll here, but anything else you want to add to that? Because this is clearly, a big value add that Caresoft provides organizations, the ability to get things contracted and contracted quickly.
yeah. I think just a couple things just for people to kind of know about maybe where we can help you. We also spend a lot of time of getting our vendors the right solutions on the right contract vehicles. And then from there, it's aligning those solutions to where the customer actually buys, which is what I mentioned before. And then, we also try to leverage our relationships across the entire ecosystem, right? We have great relationships with different resellers and distributors within this industry. So we really try to help customers and industry kind of come together and have those conversations. So overall, we're just trying to help with the access and then the execution of those deals.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if you go to the next slide, just to kind of wrap up here, I want to make sure we give you with some takeaways. So first, things to think about here: artificial intelligence adoption across federal agencies continues to expand as organizations or agencies explore how these technologies can support mission operations. Agencies are at different stages of AI maturity, right? So keep that in mind. Some are still building their infrastructure and data environment needed to support AI, while others are deploying AI capabilities operationally. And you need to understand where those agencies, and even to Caitlin's point, where those individual programs are. Most AI deployments in government are tied to specific mission use cases. such as operational decision support, document intelligence, fraud detection. So understand how you affect the mission and how you affect those use cases. These capabilities are increasingly being embedded in large operational programs, right? Which I think represents big opportunities for organizations. So don't, again, look for the little program that just says we're AI. Look at the large operational programs and how you integrate AI into that. And again, as agencies expand their use of AI, we're also seeing new procurement expectations emerging, right? Requirements around transparency, data governance, interoperability, and then the responsible use of AI. And finally, for technology companies exploring the federal market, successful strategies typically begin by identifying where your technology capabilities align with agency mission and operational needs. And you got to be able to explain that to these organizations. And I think, Caitlin, before we kind of open the floor to any questions, or is there anything else you want to add from a final takeaways perspective?
I think just three quick things. I'll keep it very simple, right?
Yeah,
One, don't lean with AI, lead with the problem. I think two, go where the money and momentum already are. And then three, figure out how to get in and how your customer is buying these
yeah,
solutions.
yeah, I agree with that. Do your research up front.
Yeah.
It's going to make you way more efficient and effective on the back end. That's how we're helping our clients today, and I think it's delivering in spades for them. So, Georgia, maybe we'll turn it over to you and see if we have any questions.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Harvey and Caitlin. That was a really useful presentation, and we appreciate your insight on AI sales and marketing strategy. As Harvey said, we can start the Q&A now, so put any of your questions in that Q&A pod on the bottom of your screen. Before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and launch the last poll since we did miss it, so get ready for that. I'll leave it open for a minute. I do have a question in the chat. From your experience, what messaging or proof points are resonating most with federal buyers today when it comes to AI solutions?
Yeah, so I can hop in first, Caitlin. Maybe you can go, but I think we kind of hit it. Is making sure you understand the mission of the system or the program that you're working with, and then how do you improve that mission? Can you help them complete the mission with less employees? Can you help them complete the mission faster? Can you help them, complete the mission smarter and more accurately? So understanding that mission and then how you can apply to that, I think it's critical. Gone are the days where you go in and go, we have the best AI model. It sucks in the most data. It has a graph and it does this. You need to understand and put it in the mission perspective for organizations. That's been my experience in working with companies.
Yeah. And I think it's like you can't go in and just try to pitch your product. You have to understand those challenges, those problems. There's GAO reports that are released by the federal government all the time. Look at those pain points. If you guys have a solution that can help make something a little bit more efficient, and everything that Harvey just said, that's where you're going to find the real opportunity.
Yeah.
And also kind of build your story, your use case, everything around that too.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
One, you both, in the, about someone who has done a lot of fraud detection, analytics, and language model projects in private. How to get started with a federal or state project.
I think you're breaking up there a little bit, Georgia.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
How about someone who has done a lot of fraud detection, analytics, and large language model projects in private? How to get started with a federal or state project?
Yeah, so I think we kind of outlined some of those agencies there that are really focused around fraud detection. So think CMS, HHS, USDA with the SNAP program, Social Security Administration, right? Those are all agencies that pay out money, and there's the ability for fraud and misuse there. Understand some of those big programs. Like I know for a fact, CMS has an office of program integrity. And under that office, they've got a couple different specific programs that they use to identify fraud. So identify those programs and then approach those organizations. Now, full disclosure, some of those organizations already have a prime that's managing those programs for them. So you're probably going to understand who those primes are and go approach them as well and talk about your capabilities and what you're able to do.
And I think it's also getting in front of your customers, like attending trade shows, attending
Yep.
events, and looking at some of those innovative procurement pathways, especially if you're newer to government. That's a pretty quick way to get into government and then kind of expand from there, especially from a lot of like open topics and things like that. But I would hit it from all angles. Like,
Yeah.
don't just try to go down one pathway. Um,
Agreed. And I know the team at Caresoft there has a lot. I mean, I know Mike Adams over there that does a lot in your AI ecosystem. So if you're not taking advantage of all the things that Caresoft is doing from an AI perspective, uh, get involved in that organization because they're doing a lot there.
Perfect. Thank you both. Another question, what are the most common mistakes you see technology companies making when trying to sell AI into the federal government?
Yeah, so again, I think it's treating the federal government as like they say they want AI, so everybody must be wanting the exact same thing, or everybody's at the same level, if you will, of their maturity. You really need to understand that. I mean, there are other things, but I think fundamentally that's kind of the first thing you've got to understand.
Yeah, it's like what you said, Harvey. It's you got to do your research
Yep.
first. And also finding those 1 to 2 use cases. Like don't try to cast a wide net across the entire federal government. Like really focus in, identify who your ideal customer profile is for your solutions or the problem you're trying to solve, and then kind of build it out that way. I
Yep.
call it reverse engineering it, but I
Yeah.
guess it's also called go-to-market engineering. So that's
Great. Well, it looks like we're coming up on top of the hour. So thank you to everyone for being with us this afternoon. I want to thank all of our participants who joined us today, as well as our speakers. We hope that this webinar has been helpful to you and your organizations. If we go to the next slide, I have some contact info. So if you would like to contact us or if you have any questions about today's presentation, please feel free to contact us via the information on this slide.